Why Pokemon? What has kept us attached to it for so many years? I've been asking myself that question countless times, but when it comes down to it, I think it's as simple as the fact that it's something already part of me and everyone. Each journey, each chapter of this legend leaves behind sparkles of light in our hearts that will remain with us forever. But what are these sparkles? That's what we'll see today with, for me, the best of each Pokemon game, starting with Red and Blue. There's a lot to thank these two icons of the video game industry. The lives of so many people would have been so different if Tajiri hadn't been dreaming big after seeing that pair of insects crawling along the link cable. Being the blueprint for everything that brings us here today, the legacy of the first generation is, of course, unparalleled. But if we stick to just the gameplay experience, I think what I enjoy the most about these releases at present would be how weird they feel. Yeah, these are titles that nowadays can feel clunky and kinda rough, but I find charming how behind every bit you can feel like the idea of the Pokemon world was taking shape. Many aspects of the game seemed obscure, odd, and mysterious. Things are a lot clearer and delimited these days, but in the first generation, Pokemon used to look and act in a very different way. It was still hard to tell whether they were dangerous or friendly creatures. There's also the fact that due to the limited space, the game's NPCs speak in a very laconic and brief way, but it somehow makes it feel intriguing and with its own charm. That's why I love Tangela so much. It's so mysterious and kinda creepy, but still feels cute and friendly. I think it's the Pokemon that best symbolizes the essence of the first generation. Of course, as many moves work weirdly, sometimes due to programming errors and others simply as a product of a lack of skills when it comes to designing and balancing attacks, they can be seen as objectively poorly made games in that sense, but in practice, it generates that competitive that is such a disaster of biblical proportions that ends up being refreshing and fun. Man, it's hard to put everything into words, but these games are a charming letdown, a very different experience than any other Pokemon game, and I really appreciate that. Yellow keeps that bizarre essence, although, ironically, if I had to choose one thing to appreciate about this game, it would be its work with the Pokemon sprites. As we said before, Red and Blue were a chaotic mess in which many aspects of the franchise, including the visuals, were yet to be established. Many of the in-game sprites of Pokemon were weird and hard to recognize. One of the good things about Yellow putting so much emphasis on the anime was the standardization of the Pocket Monsters aesthetics, with new concept art and fresh look to all the sprites that would define how they were going to look from that point on. These new sprites make the Yellow experience a lot more enjoyable and friendly. And it may seem contradictory to consider this visual sugarcoating as something positive after this weirdness was noted as a good thing in the first games of the franchise, but you're just too ugly, dude. What do you want me to do? Somehow, they retain that slightly unsettling look of the first generation, but are a lot more distinctive. Speaking of Gold and Silver, it seems like lately is a new trend in the community to undermine them and highlight their faults, so here I come to balance things out a bit, because for the simple purpose of recording some clips for a video, I went throughout half the game in a single morning, and it's amazing how much fun they still are to this day. The unique mix of a more simple, free and innocent game design in line with the first generation, but with a much richer and more interesting region is irresistible and magical to me. But of course, saying the best of the games is their fun would be too general, and even if it's cliche, if I have to pick something specific that made me fall in love with these games, it has to be the post-game journey to Kanto. Yeah, I know, the region is half empty, but you are completely unaware of what an impact it was for me at the time. Just when I thought it was all over, to receive the news that I had another whole region left to explore. Kanto, a place that, despite never having been able to explore, I had always dreamed of visiting since my friends told me wonders about Pokemon Blue. It all starts with a detail of how, if you happen to go back home once you get served, a character congratulates you for taking your first steps in Kanto, but a waterfall is blocking the way, so until you defeat all gym leaders you can't go any further, and only after the league will you be able to take the ferry and discover that it's true and there are still plenty of adventures left. I don't care if it sounds excessive, but I remember that trip on the SS Aqua, and the first night I arrived in Vermilion City as probably my happiest moment playing a video game. Crystal! I played this game with the highest level of enthusiasm for similar reasons. While playing and replaying my silver version, I remember watching mesmerized in the school lunchroom a girl from an upper grade who had this new crystal version where the Pokemon sprites moved, there was a special story with Suicune and a place called Battle Tower with trainers of unparalleled strength. And I wasn't wrong. Even to this day, that original Battle Tower remains as one of the craziest challenges of the series, with not only perfect Pokemon for the different levels but also several unfair advantages against the player. What to say about the new features such as the possibility of choosing the player's gender, but the biggest sparkle of this generation for me was a creative decision that, ironically and on the contrary, I could not even have the opportunity to experience at the time: Celebi and its event. It could continue the legacy of Mew as a mythical Pokemon that was destined to become the talk and dreams of the children of the time, but it was just that, a mirage, a coincidence. In this version, they decided to take the step to make all those dreams come true, introducing the event of its spiritual successor, Celebi. Apart from the development of the whole event, which is a bit weird and didn't leave Japan, what's amazing for me about it is how it represents the ideals of the second generation, the respect for the past and the dreams of the future, in a wonderful being that symbolizes this generational succession. After the enigmatic Mew, which story and nature had been only vaguely outlined and still remained a mystery, the Crystal version and Celebi define what mythical Pokemon should be, beings that embody the innocence and pure essence of the generation, and there was a good reason why, in the following years, we could enjoy such wonderful events thanks to what this small being established. Now it's time for Ruby and Sapphire, a new world to explore, far from the continuity of previous releases. I think that with such a unique identity, the main strength of these games lies in their exploration, the exuberant nature, and all the mysteries that their areas have to unravel, the exotic creatures of its very varied Pokédex, the enchanting locations and eerie environments, all combined with a graphical leap to the beautiful and colorful pixel art of these titles. These were the first games with Masuda as director, who always bet on releases that presented a new and fresh journey. The exciting Hoenn is all the proof you need, and quite a statement and declaration of the plans he had for the series. Speaking about the first remakes of the franchise, I really appreciate in general how well they recreated the feeling of discovery of the first generation, making it a lot more fun. But my heart in these games has an owner, or owners, the beautiful Sabi Islands. It's not a post-game that people usually are fond of, so I must be one of the few fans on Earth that not only enjoyed it, but it also left a mark on me. Besides keeping the essence of Kanto, with that simple and innocent feeling, there's something zen and custombrist about them that I really love. Its residents are aware of the busy Kanto and the other regions, but they live at a different pace. We get dialogues of their daily life, simple but full of meaning. There are no gyms, no Pokemon League, but everyone seems to be present, connected to nature and finding value even in the smallest things. The Water Labyrinth, Pattern Bush, Outcast Island, Resort Gorgeous, Sibal Canyon, or Five Isle Meadow. Every location is fun to explore just for the sake of doing it, in a charming naivety that takes you back to the first steps in the franchise. The fact that they managed to recreate such emotions so many years later is not appreciated enough. Emerald was the farewell of the Game Boy Advance, and if I have to choose something, there is no doubt about it. The Battle Frontier was the perfect challenge. You could spend entire mornings trying to clear the different buildings, testing yourself against formidable trainers under all kind of rules, all in an attempt to reach the elite of the Pokémon world, the Frontier Brains. The designs of these characters are so flashy and stunning, and they were so inaccessible that looking at them feels both intimidating and nostalgic at the same time, as reminiscences of battles that never happened. In recent years, some interesting challenges have appeared in the series, but I think none have managed to recreate the thrill of the original Battle Frontier, and getting the chance to experience something like this in the innocence of my childhood was really a gift. That said, the 4th generation was the first time I got to enjoy a game from its actual release. During that summer, I was with my grandparents enjoying my vacation in the countryside, and for some reason they received the games 4 days before the official release date. I can't describe how much I love Last Days of Summer, hooked to this new adventure. Nowadays, the slow pace of the games is often pointed out, and it's true that for some people replaying them can be a bit of a pain, but the fact that everything was slow cooking on that first journey was a positive thing for me. This gave me time to draw, dream, and enjoy every last corner of the mysterious 4th generation. But school was back in September, and I remember returning to the city and meeting up with my friends to talk about what we had been doing with the new games as another amazing moment. All the chat wasn't for nothing, and introduced maybe not the most important part of the games, but my favorite and the one that most impressed me, the GTS and the Wi-Fi connection. This could have been something so simple as to go unnoticed, but at the time, having a Wi-Fi connection was not common at all, at least in my country, so we always went back home from school with a Nintendo DS ready in hand, looking for hotspots like true adventurers, finding one and then trading some of the crazy Pokémon there was. What can I say? One of the happiest moments for me playing this series, a treasure that I hold dear, especially nowadays when we are all hyper connected and don't appreciate the magic that this kind of thing had back in the day. Platinum. As I said in the video about the worst thing of each game, I'm not a huge fan of the change that legendaries and mythicals of this generation underwent in terms of status, but one thing I always point out is the love they gave to those encounters. The Lake Guardians and their bond to the characters, the Spear Pillar as the place where the world began and where only you stand in the way of its end, the Distortion World as a representation of one of the most abstract ideas of the Pokémon universe, a quantic dream, harmony, and yet at the same time chaos, like the reflection of an imposing mountain in a lake, which only exists because you look at it. New Moon Island as a portrayal of a place that only exists in your nightmares. Stark Mountain, which is indeed very stark, and probably my personal favorite in the whole franchise. The Flower Paradise, a utopical path of flowers that the player can follow as a gift for the dreaming soul of all these years. And at the end of it, the mythical Pokémon of your dreams awaits, shaming and its gratitude for believing symbolizes for me the essence of Pokémon like no other mythical. And so, we reach the golden and silver years of Pokémon with the Johto remakes. The level of love and detail in these games was unparalleled, but the part that stuck with me the most about them would once again be out of its cartridges, the Poké Walker. The fact that something like this was included as a gift of such complete games is overwhelming. Can you guess what they would do today? They I will easily charge you $50 with the argument that it includes the latest event Pokemon that you can't get in any other way. Not only was this gadget one of the most accurate pedometers in the world at the time, but taking your Pokemon for a walk to touch grass with such a beautiful thing. And let's not forget that it was also a way to embody the ultimate principle of the generation, respect and connection with nature. I remember bringing it to high school, where some friends and I could be shaking our legs all day long to see who could accumulate the most steps. That term I failed 5 subjects. The option to check from time to time what you had achieved, and once you got back home, transfer your achievements and continue with your journey, which I handled with so much love to what was my first contact with the Pokemon world. Seriously, has a lot of merit for a time when the internet, social networks and smartphones were beginning to spread like a virus. They really managed to create such a pure shelter. Black and White. We had already discussed a lot about the great features of these games, but I think it was in their ending that we reached the peak of the series. In that final confrontation, for all that the Pokemon world has represented and will represent from that moment on, with the heroes of truth and ideals, we find all the elements of the game reflected as one. At one point, Anne asks if you have a dream, and whether you answered yes or no at the time, he has a message for you in this ending. Anne is a dreamer who pursued his ideal no matter how challenging the situation became. Even when everything he believed in completely crumbled, he moved forward and began his journey to change the world. And it may seem like he's the one who learns from the player after each battle to challenge his own mindset, but the opposite is also true. His words seem to aim to have a real impact on the person who is playing the game. If you told him in Cherstone Cave that you don't have a dream, he encourages you to look for one and learn how you have the power to change yourself and the world. But if you told him you do have one, he encourages you to stand up, stop waiting for the best time, and start moving. Those words are targeted directly to the player, and the sudden shift to the epic credits theme is the boost of motivation we need to, inspired by the great story of these two heroes, set off to our own destiny. Black and White 2 are probably the most well-rounded games of the franchise, but of all their virtues, for me, being direct sequels is their greatest strength and the foundation of everything they do well. Because after 4 generations of following the tradition of third versions with only limited cosmetic upgrades, these games broke the pattern by being what this type of game should have been from the very beginning. A new story that echoes, extends and completes everything that the first releases brought to the table. That final showdown with Champion Iris makes you remember how things were 2 years ago, and it brings a smile to your face, because no matter if in the world there are always people who stubbornly see everything in black and white, we always can be better and fill the world with color. After all, at the end of the day, training Pokemon is fun. X and Y began the new era of 3 dimensions, and although I've always recognized the effort of being able to remake the whole world in 3D from one generation to the next, a colossal effort that is especially surprising in contrast to the conditions in which the games are released today, looking back at it, I don't think that the leap to 3D in the franchise has been a positive or negative thing in itself. To mention something original, the best thing about this generation was without a doubt the online accessibility. How easy it was to get online to trade or battle with people from all over the world is something I've missed these past few years more than I would have liked. As for the best thing of the new Hoenn remakes, for me it was the whole reinterpretation of the game events, following its core but improving the story a lot and adapting it to the new lore and the 6th generation. Team Aqua and Magma are no longer just some fools who want to sink and evaporate the planet, but rather a group of romanticists who, inspired by seafaring life, are obsessed with returning the world to simpler times, and a group of scientists who want to accelerate the development development of mankind. The Delta episode has some flaws when it comes to gameplay and plot, but the introduction of Xenia as a character that, in order to achieve a superior goal, manipulates Archie and Maxie, turning their idealism and good intentions into fanaticism and violence, gives it another layer of extra meaning, and it's really awesome. The abandoned ship is replaced by the not so mysterious but infinitely deeper and detailed Sea Mauville, which subtly gave New Mauville and the Hoenn region an amazing and disturbing backstory. It's really cool how they took some pretty unrelated elements from the third generation and gave them all that updated meaning to the modern Pokemon world. I feel like somehow they had all the stories in mind from the start, but everything was cut out as they weren't capable of doing them justice at the time, just to redeem themselves in this remake to express that ultimate version of Hoenn. Sun and Moon stood out for their unique and genuine approach to the Pokemon world. While there was clearly a reluctance to take real risks on certain things, it was nevertheless a twist on the formula in every way. The regional forms that made us fall in love again with all friends, the villainous team that tells us a truly unique story, the people of the region who welcomes us with a warm Alola. The 7th generation revolves around the idea of life, and the wide range of emotions we experience in its story lives up to these intentions. Fun, excitement, and romance. Alola has everything to become a great summer adventure with your friends. Who hasn't experienced the typical summer of being chosen by a guardian deity to save the world from interdimensional beings? As for Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, even though in my opinion it was an experience eclipsed by certain questionable decisions, it still has its bright spots, like what happens with the Ultrabus, which we had already seen as interesting and incomprehensible designs in Sun and Moon, but that's all they were and we still needed to know more about them. These games did a great job in this area, allowing us, to everyone's surprise, to visit their worlds, some of them with disturbing implications that really sparked the imagination, but also radically different from the Pokemon world we are familiar with. I love how this interdimensional travels confirm that, contrary to what seemed at first glance, they are just Pokemon from another world, confused and scared ever since they appeared in Alola due to Necrozma. Acting as we see in the event games, Sword and Shield gave us the epitome of the ideal Pokemon League, with a region wild for battle, and some interesting mechanics where everyone, challengers, gym leaders, and current champions, compete for the title on an equal footing. This sportive approach is enhanced with a lot of passion and epicness thanks to its amazing battle setting, empowered by the impressive Dynamax. But other than that, I think the feature that stood out the most about this generation and is completely underrated is the characters. The champion, as the spitting image of the strongest model that the franchise has been promoting since its origins, a man who, in the face of those expectations, is not frightened and continues to push himself. The younger brother of that champion who has been under the pressure of surpassing him since he was a child, living a dream that is not his own, only to choose his own path. A girl who's the last hope of her people, struggling to become a star in order to help them, despite her shyness and introverted personality. All the characters in the games are aligned with the purest ideal of a hero, which these titles represent as the last hope in a world engulfed in darkness, in a classic RPG style. In Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, there's a very interesting surprise in its Elite Four. Being among the most challenging ones from the start, it was great to see their transformation. It's refreshing to find something like this in a must-win battles before the post-game. It's the Elite Four, the best trainers in the world, and perhaps this is the first time in the series that they have managed to convey that feeling even for experienced players. In Legends Arceus, we find, once again, its main asset in its own nature. Released alongside remakes, it seemed like a statement that they wanted to experiment with the formula and evolve it. The whole concept of revisiting new regions in a completely different way instead of replaying stories we have already experienced is undoubtedly the best thing about these titles, and in general one of the greatest news for the franchise. And finally, Scarlet and Violet. These games stand out for their story and all its elements, plot, characters, and mysteries, but I have already gone into detail detail on all these topics in previous videos, and to mention something new that I think is very underrated in this generation, it would be how its lore is not as we had been seeing so far in a legend of an old book that only exists for the player to read and find out. The lore, the legend of the 9th generation, is the very story we embody, the encounter with the paradox, the time loop, and the treasure that exists from the moment we go after it. But I hope this little mini-series opening my heart with the lights and shadows of each generation has been entertaining and interesting for you. Follow me on social media to see the art I'm doing and the path I'm following, and if you still want to hear more about my letdowns of the games, take a look at the video on screen with my wishes and things I don't want to see in the future Legends CA. Be nice!